I think that we're all noticing that throughout Proverbs, there's just so much repetition, which I think I told you last week. As I read through Proverbs, depending on the day, sometimes it drives me crazy. Like, I get it. Why do I have to read the same thing over and over and over? And then the next day I'll wake up and think, oh, thank you, God, that you remind me over and over and over in so many subtly different ways that I can't forget. And so what we're going to do is I've tried to take a handful of verses and kind of organize them in a way where they're a little bit more topical. So we're going to do that together. But one of the topics that keeps arising over and over, I'm sure you've noticed it, is the use of words. And we've talked at length that in Hebrew culture, words are a creative force, that what you do with words can bring life to a thing. Quite literally, right at the beginning of Genesis, God begins to create. And we talked about this. How does God do it? He speaks it into existence. And so there is this deeply held theology that what you do with your words matters a great deal. And we've talked about it a few times, but I think it's kind of the most repeated theme so far, so we might as well pause again and talk a bit more about it. So let's look at verse 3 together. Whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. I want to focus on a couple words that I kind of was drawn to. The first one is guard, and the second one is to preserve. I did a little digging. This word guard is actually a military word. It's basically fortifying something of great worth or great value. It could be a strategic kind of military point on the top of a hill, like the good high ground. It could be, we got to build a fortress around this so people can't take it. It could be like an arms depot. Maybe all the swords or bow and arrows are all in this one building, and so we got to protect them. And so here's the word. Whoever guards, this is the idea of protecting, fortifying, resourcing a place, being ready for battle. Whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. And so there's something about your mouth and your life that go together. When I looked up the word preserve, it's actually something we all kind of know. Some people grew up calling things preserves. Some people call them jellies. Some people call them jams. But what is a preserve in that sense? Okay, keeping something from spoiling, taking something that's good and wonderful. So you can imagine the harvest, and there's no refrigeration, there's no freezing. Now you have so much. Let's just say, I don't know, how many of you are strawberry jelly people? Okay, that's your favorite. Okay, we'll go strawberries. So we have so many strawberries. Once you pick a strawberry, how long is it going to last for? 1 day in the heat, maybe 2, right? Okay, so what do you got to do to it? It's delicious, it's wonderful, except if you wait too long, JT's just eat them all. Yeah, he's just going to eat them all. So if we have to start a camp and grow our own food, JT would keep a close eye on him. But the idea is we have to do something to it to make sure that it keeps its nutrition, its vibrancy, its taste. And what can we do to it? There's all sorts of methods people can and do these sorts of things. So the definition is to give longevity to something good. So whoever guards his mouth, protects it as something valuable, preserves something for the long haul, something that is good, which is your life. That keeping a close check on the words that come out of your mouth will actually have a positive impact on the life you lead. I was thinking through this. Many of you already know this scripture. This comes from the book of James. James chapter 3 says this. If we put bits into the mouths of horses that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are large and driven by very strong winds, they are guarded by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs it. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. The idea is that this little thing is actually directing something much larger. I think for the human, for Proverbs, the idea is that our words can direct our entire life. It goes on, it says this, how great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. Some versions, I think, say a small spark. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we can bless our Lord and Father, and with it we can curse people who are made in the likeness of God. And so from the same mouth can come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. I got to imagine that being a good, faithful Jew, that James knew Proverbs chapter 13, and he knew that this was something to elaborate on. That the way that we use our words has the potential to praise God, which I think is the highest form of speech, right? It's the worship, the declaration of who God is and who we are underneath his reign. But it also has the ability to start forest fires. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. I grew up with a phrase in my house, and it wasn't so much about not lying as much as just keeping secrets. It was, maybe you know it, loose lips sink ships. We said that all the time in my house, and that meant among the 5 brothers, don't be a snitch. The idea was if your loose lips rat me out, I'm going to sink you, more or less is what it meant in my house. But there's this idea that our words can do great harm. And I was thinking about, we all know this to be true. But sometimes it's really easy to point out like ways that other people hurt each other with their words or how people lie with their words. And we don't reflect on what does that mean for me. So I just wrote down a few things that I've seen, and if I'm honest, have been temptations or things that I've just blatantly done and been embarrassed or regretful about. Here's one that I think has come up a fair amount is, how many of you wake up in the morning with the intention to gossip? I hope none of you. But sometimes I think what happens is we get insecure. Maybe we're in a circle of people, it's a social circle, or maybe you don't feel like you're an insider and people are kind of gossipy or talking, and you realize that's what they're doing. And then it's almost like your time to speak and you want to fill some time. And so maybe you don't like full-blown gossip, but you maybe throw a couple crumbs out there. Is that gossiping? Yes. Gossip is not a sliding scale. It's either yes or no, right? So maybe in insecurity, you say something and you begin to think like, why did I say that? I've seen this happen a fair bit, is maybe you meet somebody new and you feel like everyone else should have an idea of what your first impression of that person was. Anybody ever have this experience? Where all of a sudden you think, I think people should hear what I have to say about a first impression of this new person I just met. I feel like this is a common thing. Maybe you become defensive over a feeling without thinking. Maybe somebody says something and it kind of rubs you the wrong way, and so you quickly lash out, or you say something that in retrospect probably should have just been withheld. And I think the rule of thumb is that really there are hurtful things that can't be unsaid. I read this proverb this week. I think I put it in your outline. It's an ancient Middle Eastern proverb, and it says this: take heed that your tongue does not slit your own throat. It's a powerful quotation. As far as I could tell, that was basically a wisdom saying passed down to young men and young women as they kind of came of age. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Here is our question. It's kind of a self-reflection question. And instead of just thinking, using your words to do evil things is what bad, evil people do, but maybe how can I have some self-awareness to how I can walk this out more faithfully. So here's the prompt. I found this quote this week, and I thought it was hilarious and also fitting. It comes from the early 1800s, Adam Clarke, who was a Methodist. He wrote these words: it has often been remarked that God has given us 2 eyes that we may see much, and two ears that we may hear much, but has given us but 1 tongue, and then fenced it in with teeth to indicate that though we hear and see much, we should speak but little. I like that idea of your teeth is like the guard around your lips, right? So here's the question: in what type of situations do you find yourself over-talking? And I put that in quotations because I think that could be gossip, that could be saying things you shouldn't say or things you regret. And this is what I would like you to do. I'd like you to think about a real time that maybe that happened. So why do you think that was the case? And then how can you grow in self-awareness and self-control to being a better listener the next time instead of just jumping in with words that you might regret. So we'll take 5 or 6 minutes to do that together, and then we'll jump back in with verse 5. So ready, set, go. Okay, now we're going to, I think, shift just slightly. So we're talking about guarding your mouth. We're talking about using words in a way that's life-giving to others and glorifying to God. And I think as far as words go, I think one thing I've noticed is that generally, not always, that people are very gracious. Much more than maybe you think. How many of you have ever had this situation where you say something, then you get in the car and you're like beating yourself up, like, I'm such an idiot. Why did I say that? They probably think I'm a total moron. And even if there's maybe a little awkwardness from that point forward, usually over time, people are just gracious people, especially around a place like this. So I think the idea is not, you better get out there and use your words every time to glorify God and to bring life to others, or else. I think the idea is, where can I have some self-awareness of some areas I could grow in, and what are some strategies? Maybe it's, here's a social setting that I can see, it's on my calendar for Friday, and I have a history with some of those people putting my foot in my mouth a little bit. Maybe on Friday morning I'm going to wake up 30 extra minutes early, maybe I'll go for a little walk or say a little prayer, jot some things down, and I'm just going to go into that a little bit different. Arian said something really simple and profound to me, is just preparing really thoughtful questions to ask of people. Sometimes I'm guilty of, I'm now in a conversation, I didn't really think this through, and now I say something dumb instead of, hey, I have a thoughtful question to ask. So I think to boil it down, the idea is this is what God desires. This is what God has created words and communication for. If you're someone who feels like you're putting your foot in your mouth a lot, don't beat yourself up, but pursue God's grace and remember that people are gracious to you. So now we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about speaking the truth versus speaking falsehoods. How many of you have flipped on the news recently? I cannot remember a time where I read or watch news where I'm like, that is demonstrably false in real time. What you are saying is not true. Like, I'm almost like, I want to do like a poll. How many people are buying this stuff? It's just crazy. But this is what Proverbs 13:5 and 6 says. It says, the righteous hates falsehood. That word hate shows up a couple times in Proverbs 13, and that is a very strong word. How many of you grew up in a house where mom or dad said, we don't use the word hate? Nobody? We weren't really supposed to say hate. We could say, like, I don't like, but we don't say, I hate you. Like, I dislike you in this moment, but we're not allowed to use the word hate. But the Bible uses this word, that the righteous hate falsehood. And I think hate is actually an active word, because so often we might hear lies, or we might hear things that are misleading on purpose, and we might think like, I'll just avoid it. I'll just roll my eyes. But to hate it is to be repulsed by something. It's that something in you recognizes that this is the polar opposite of what God's word is and who God is in his very character, because God is what is true. And so falsehood and truth cannot coexist well together. So I think what Proverbs is saying is, like, you should be a person that's repulsed by falsehood. But the wicked bring shame and disgrace. Many of you know this. The idea of shame and disgrace is kind of playing into a culture that was an honor and shame culture. This is primarily how Hebrew culture organized and governed itself. It's honor and shame, that your job is to bring honor to your family system, your family name, and to do something. For instance, how many of you know the story of the prodigal son? So what are the shameful acts in the prodigal son? We could just go through them, because that's what the story is really all about. What are the shameful things that happen? Got one son, comes to his dad, who's very wealthy and done very well for himself, honored his family by building up wealth and property and livestock. And what does the son say? I would like my money now. Basically, in that culture, it's, to me, why don't you just pretend to be dead so I can have what should be mine before you're dead, right? Is that a shameful thing? Yes, big time. So you're already picturing who this guy is. Now he takes his inheritance, he goes off to a far-off land, and what does he do? He squanders it with all sorts of things that are shameful, so more shame, right? And then kind of the crux of the story is he's coming home off in the distance. He decides, man, the pigs here eat better than I do. At least I could go like hire myself out to my dad. He's off on the horizon, and what does the father do? Runs, and running is a shameful act, especially for the head of a household. So it's this beautiful story about honor and shame, and this is how this world was governed. So when it says, the wicked bring shame and disgrace, the wicked are those who live into and accept falsehood. So let's talk about what happens when you accept things that are blatantly not true as the truth. What happens, let's say, let's do something extreme. How about a perpetual liar? Anybody ever met somebody who's just a perpetual liar? They just can't help themselves but lying. Like, why are you lying about that? That's clearly not true. Anybody know these people? I actually had a really, really strange encounter with somebody, kind of like third hand. It was somebody kind of on the periphery of the last church I worked at, and they had set up like a GoFundMe for their child with cancer. Except it turned out that they didn't actually have a child with cancer, and they didn't actually have a child at all. But it was like this story, and the more kind of drawing people's emotion into giving money, the story had to get more elaborate and deeper and deeper. And how many of you know for a time that might actually draw more emotion into it? But over time, what does that also do? It makes you start scratching your head and questioning some things, and those stories unravel. So I wrote a few things down. Perpetual lying alienates you from real friendships, because even if you have a connection with someone you think is your friend, if they don't truly know you, what is your friendship built on? Lies. It alienates you from true intimacy, friendship, partners, any of those sorts of things. Separates you from becoming the person God actually called you to be, because you're living into something that is false and not true. Perpetual liars, I looked this up on a psychological, what is it called, DSM. Over time will create a false reality. Even the way they understand and see the world will be false. They bring shame and disgrace. Verse 6 says this, righteousness guards him whose way is blameless, but sin overthrows the wicked. I was thinking we're in the Gospel of John on Sundays. There's this really famous, wonderful passage in chapter 8. It says, I wrote it down in my outline, it says, you belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his, anybody know? Native tongue or native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Very interesting. So the Bible is kind of creating this very clear contrast between what is false and what is true. A couple things I wrote down. I wrote down this. Righteousness is being a truth teller, because righteousness is being somebody who is right in the eyes of God. That's not sin-free. It's somebody whose heart is turned towards God. Their intention of their heart is to honor and glorify God in all that they do. And when that is what your heart is set on, you are somebody pursuing being a truth teller. So telling the truth is a guard against sin, because it doesn't entertain falsehood. Because falsehood, the Bible is clear, is something that belongs to the enemy. It actively seeks out what is true in all situations. And here's where I think this is important, and then the rubber hits the road. How many of you know that the truth is not always convenient? Yeah? Never have I felt this more clearly in my life than when I have a child who went to school for the first time this year. And you realize, the truth is not always convenient. How many of you know that your children are perfect and they're little angels and they never make mistakes? And their little mistakes almost never look exactly like the mistakes that you really wish you hadn't passed along. Yeah. So, truth is of God, and people who are righteous pursue the truth in all situations, even when it's not convenient, even when it's not comfortable, even when it doesn't feel safe. I was thinking about all the atrocities I know of just in the last 200 years. I had an hour-long conversation with JT about one of my new pet projects, which is the Russian Revolution. How many things are just overlooked. It's not that I want to sidestep the truth, it's just that I don't really want to acknowledge hatred and falsehood, and so I'll just pretend it doesn't exist. What happens when we pretend that evil things are not happening? They just continue to grow. Things happen, right? They begin to bloom out, and nasty, sinful, dark things happen. So the last thing it says is this: sin overthrows the wicked. I read a commentary this week, and it says, usually sin overthrows the wicked on earth, but even if it doesn't on earth, it will eternally. So we can pause right here. Anybody want to contribute anything to the true and false conversation? Okay. Wanda, are you half saying something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that sometimes when you're in those false conversations, that's sometimes when you just need to keep your mouth shut because they're not going to listen to you anyway. No matter what you say. So sometimes the wise thing to do is just to stay quiet and let them finish whatever they're saying, and maybe be able to change the subject or something.
So this is a perfect segue, because I think what I was thinking and why I kind of put these two sections back to back is that the first one says that we should be listeners before we speak words, right? Because words are for speaking life and honoring and glorifying God. But it's very clear that we should guard what words come out of our mouth. But now we're being told that we should be people who speak the truth. So what is the balance? If we have like this scale here, and we have be a listener on one side, and we have speak the truth on the other side. Let's talk this out. How do we figure out when we should do each? Yeah, Ricardo. Okay, that's a good start. Actually saves like 5 minutes of roundabout conversation that was going to end there anyways. What do you mean by that? Okay.
He teaches us to be equally yoked. So being around people that are seeking righteousness on one side, and on the other side, we also can't ignore those that don't know about Christ. There's balancing, limiting what you say, but also speaking.
Okay, so there's definitely a balancing act, and Jesus definitely has the pivotal role, like literally right on the pivot, right? So why don't we kind of walk out like a tangible example. Let's say you're standing in a social circle and people are talking about, I don't know, spirituality, which is I think a common conversation. And is spirituality a thing? Does God exist? Does God not exist? And here you come into this conversation, you're a follower of Jesus. How do you know when it would be time to speak the truth in that conversation? How would you know I'm just going to be a listener in this conversation? You personally, not third person, some other person. You. How would you know? I love how you said that, because led by the Spirit and discernment, but then you also pulled in like personal experience. I've done enough discernment to kind of know which voice is which. I think that's an important note, because sometimes I think people can put so much pressure on themselves to get it right, and in the pressure to get it right, they do nothing. Danny, were you going to say something? Yeah, I like that. I like how you differentiated like people just telling their personal experience. Whether you get weirded out or think that's right or wrong, it's their experience, but as soon as it becomes a truth claim, this is something that we actually have a very solid foundation we stand on to speak forth. Was somebody else right here going to say something? Wanda, were you going to say something? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought. Okay. Yeah, JT, please. Yeah, I think we've talked about this before in here. I think sometimes our assumption is like, oh, if we just pray and read our Bible and then something really bad happens, we'll hear God's voice. We'll know his voice when it comes up. But if we don't make room in quiet and solitude to hear his voice and then walk it out and confirm that really was his voice, I don't know that our ears are really tuned well to hear his voice when it gets very noisy. I would love to say that a lot of conflict or difficult things in my life have all happened in the quiet, still place of life where I'm like, there's only one voice that can speak. I'm listening, God. But it never happens that way, does it? And I like what you said. You walk it out, and that's the confirmation on this side of eternity of that really was his voice, and we begin to tune our ear to understand and hear it. I like that. Thank you for all who contributed. Now I want to talk about getting rich fast, because that's what this is really all about. Verse 7. You know what? Actually, before I read it, this is just such a crazy observation. So we've talked about Proverbs. Proverbs is very old. We know this, right? And sometimes I think about the American get-rich scheme. Or like the I want it all now, all the chips to the center. Or what was the game? Roulette, right? Roulette, like put all of it on black or whatever. This is actually part of the human condition that's thousands of years old. This is not something our culture created. So this is what Proverbs says at least 3,000 years ago. One pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. I asked a friend about this, and he was like, he grew up in kind of a very lower middle class, lower class, kind of inner city environment. And he was like, I know what this means. It means that all my neighbors lived like 6 people in a 1-bedroom apartment, but they all had super nice cars. So that when they went to work, it looked like they were super rich. And then they would come home, and I was like, I never thought of that. He's like, you know how many poor neighborhoods everyone has really nice cars? And I'm like, I do. Now that you say that, it's never clicked with me. So this is it. One pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. And another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. Now, I put a footnote there because this word pretend is actually not really in the Hebrew Bible. It's an addition, because what it really says is the one who makes himself rich, yet has nothing. So there's a couple things here. There is a little bit of a translation issue where we get a couple different words. How many of you have an actual Bible open in front of you? Ricardo, what version do you have, and what does yours say? NASB. Okay, you have NASB, and what does it say? Okay, so you have pretend. Anybody else have something else? You don't have to go on your phone or anything, but yeah, JT. King James. Okay.
There is that maketh himself rich, yet hath nothing. There is that maketh himself poor, yet hath nothing.
So it's maketh. That's a good one. Okay, another version is make yourself appear rich. So I think here's the idea. The idea is not just that you're like playing a game, but you're intentionally doing something to make yourself look a way that you're actually not. There's not substance behind maybe your first impression or your appearance. So if you take my example, you drive a super expensive car off to work, and this is your life, and this is what people perceive you as, you're probably not going to invite a lot of people home for dinner, right? Because then the gig would be up a little bit. So what does it mean? One pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. I think here's the idea, is that there are people who will go to great lengths to appear to look in certain ways. Can you think of maybe a piece of our society or our culture that does this all the time? This is like what their business is? We'll play like hangman. Ready? Yeah, there we go. Instagram. I haven't played hangman in ages. I feel like I'd love to play, but taking 2 minutes of a Bible study to play a 3rd grade game would not be a good use of our time. Okay, so what is the model of Instagram? How does it project something that maybe lacks substance behind the scenes? What is Instagram, first of all? It's a social media platform, and what do you put up there? Your best pictures. Okay, so you take 20 pictures, you scan through them to make sure everyone's eyes are open, the kids have the right smiles, right? That one's the best of the 20. Now I have 1 out of 20. Any statisticians in the house? What percentage is that? 5%? Okay, now I got to add a filter onto it, right? So filter. I got to have my skin tone looking good. Boom, that one. I look bronze in summary right there. Boom, now it's on there, right? So what is this? Is that really a picture of you? Linda said fake. Is that really a picture of you? Yes. But what happens when all the world sees is the very minuscule percent, the very best version of you at all times? I remember once we did this at youth group. I just asked them to go on Instagram in their free time and fill out like a little sheet, like what do they see? And what they came back is a couple things. If you only lived in Instagram, if all you could see was Instagram, they said teenagers never go to school. Which I'm like, oh, I didn't think of that. Nobody takes a picture of just doing my homework again. Right? They don't do that. Okay, so if you just have that, you're never in school. You never post pictures of you at work, more or less, right? Okay, so people don't go to school. They don't work. What do you post pictures of? I'm on vacation. I'm eating super expensive food, right? You all know phone guy. I feel like this has died a little bit. How many of you knew somebody like 10 years ago that took pictures of every meal they ate? That kind of has disappeared, but okay, so you're always eating nice food, you're always on vacation, you're always with friends, you're always with family, you're always happy. And if you just had one or two of those photos at a time, you might leave thinking like, oh, I'm glad they're having a nice time. But when that's all you ever see, what does it begin to do to you? My life stinks compared to them, right? They don't even go to school. Or on the other end is now I've built like this facade that I have to stand out in front of, and I can't let anyone go home to see what's behind my nice car, so to speak, right? So I think this is the idea of appearing rich. What does it actually say? Pretending to be rich, yet has nothing. I read one commentary this week that was using this as like spiritual language, like pretending that I have all the Christian words and I can quote the scriptures. But behind the scenes, I think the New Testament calls this whitewashed tombs, that there's actually decay and death going on inside of there. The opposite is another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. Now, I think this word makes more sense here. They appear to be poor. It says, they appear to be poor, yet has great wealth. This is not always intentional. It's not that I'm going out of my way to look like I'm poor when I'm rich. It's just I'm living in such a way that I'm not living with wealth at the forefront. How many of you know of people that maybe through some gift or something generous they've done, you'd be like, whoa, I had no idea. Or maybe you know somebody behind the scenes, but in public, you would guess most people have no idea that they're very wealthy. Yeah. How many of you deep in your spirit respect that a great deal, especially in a culture that's just flaunting things around, right? So this is what it says, because I want to take it back to what it actually says. The one who pretends to be poor has great wealth. So this could be taken as dollars and cents, or it could be taken in a spiritual sense, that somebody who's saying, you know what, in my humility that I don't know everything. I'm trying to figure it out like everyone else. Or like Paul, of all the sinners, I'm the worst. And I'm working out my sin, and I don't stand or sit in the judgment seat, but I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to be open and honest about the ways that I stink at it sometimes, but I'm going to fail forward and trust the people who love God around me to lift me up and point me in the right direction. They are actually living a very, very fruitful, rich life. Goes on in verse 11. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle. I love this. I put this in the footnotes. I look up words that I just scratch my head and wonder what they mean. This word gained hastily, if you look at your third footnote, it actually means wealth gained, it's like vapor wealth. It's wealth that actually has nothing behind it. I looked up some cross-references, and this word gets used to describe the language of Job's friends. It means that there are real words coming out of their mouth, but they mean nothing. Isn't that interesting? Especially for people who have just been talking about the power of words. So wealth gained hastily will dwindle. It's the idea of like water vapor in the air, that it'll warm up and it'll disappear. You'll never see it again. But whoever gathers little by little will increase it. So we've been doing this for the last two. Maybe we could write it down just to stay organized. So there's kind of two readings. There is the, I'm just going to do a dollar sign, And there is kind of a spiritual component to all of these proverbs as well. So let's start with the actual literal financial piece. Wealth gained hastily and quickly will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. I did a little digging. Let me get a sip here. About what Proverbs calls the vapor money, the fast money, which is rarely permanent. And I had watched a while back, there's this ESPN docu-series. It's called Broke. Has anybody heard of Broke? It was part of their 30 for 30 series. And it followed some pro athletes and their rise and then their financial fall. And it really follows this one basketball player who made $108 million and was completely bankrupt on government assistance 5 years later. How does that happen? How does that happen? Here's some other stats for you. One survey estimates that roughly 1 in 3 lottery winners are bankrupt within 5 years. That's higher than the average bankruptcy rate for the average American. Why is that? Why is that?
Because they don't know how to handle it, and they just spend it however, they buy the fancy car, they buy the big house, they buy the, whatever, they think a wealthy person has,
So it's almost like they see what wealthy people have, and now I get to play rich person without actually knowing how that works. When in reality, even if you do a quick Google search, the majority of like multimillionaires in the United States, how did most of them earn money? Usually over a 30 to 50 year career, right? Do we like that story? No, we want to turn on the news and figure out who won $1 billion on the mega jackpot, right? That's what we want because we like it. There's some like dopamine hit that could be you. You could put it all on black and let it ride, or whatever they say. I need to brush up on my Vegas movies to figure out the lingo. This is what I think we've already learned from Proverbs. We learned this a couple weeks ago, that in hard work, you're not just working, but God is working in you. So you're out in a field all day, every day. Does your back hurt? Yeah. Do you love your job? Not always. Right? But when your neighbor all of a sudden, maybe a monsoon is coming and they're like, we got to harvest this field right now or else I'm going to lose it all. Are you prepared to jump in and help? Yeah, because there's been something shaped in you. You've recognized that, man, work is sometimes hard and I still show up. Sometimes my back hurts and I got to wake up early to stretch it out and I got to show up, right? Because you begin to be shaped into somebody of discipline. And I think what Proverbs is saying is just something we already know from Proverbs, that those who gather little by little, along the process of gathering, they're also being shaped as a certain type of person that can steward what God is giving them well. The person who gets it fast has not been shaped in the same way. That's not to say that every jackpot winner is somehow evil or terrible, although I would not suggest that you leave here and go buy jackpot tickets. I have one story for you, kind of an interesting story, one of the first times I ever encountered this. When I finished college, I got this really interesting job. I moved in with a man with Down syndrome. I think I've told you this story before. And it was a triplex, so it was 3 units, and every unit had some adults with special needs and then an adult. People used to call me a caretaker, but we weren't caretakers. We were more like friends who helped launch independent people into their day and then received them at the end of the day and made sure they were doing all the things they were supposed to do. Lots of funny stories because lots of times they don't do what they're supposed to do, but that's a different story. Anyways, my roommate, his name was Nick. His dad was an immigrant from Latvia, and he was tremendously wealthy. He had like 3 mansions throughout the country. He had like a ski resort property. He had his own private jet. He had all of these things. Very, very wealthy guy. I almost never saw the guy not wearing board shorts and flip-flops. He was a man in his 60s. And I met his wife, and she used to be driven absolutely bonkers by him. And one time she told me this, and I'll never forget. She said, do you know what he does when he wakes up at 5 a.m. every day? And I was thinking, I don't know, maybe he opens his email and shoots off important legal. He goes out and he gets the newspaper and he starts clipping coupons. And I remember thinking, like, coupons like save 5 cents on the Yoplait yogurt? Like, exactly that. But what she said is, this is how he was raised. This is how, when there were moments where his law practice was going to go under, and he decided, I'm going to eat Yoplait yogurt for every meal to make sure everyone's paycheck clears. This is how he was shaped and formed. And so now, just because all of this exists, you can't take that out of him. And I remember thinking, like, really early on, the reason I remember it is it's one of the first times I ever heard a powerful story that I felt like God was teaching me how to make it into a spiritual principle. Of you can't take that out of somebody. In fact, the reason he has it is because he's been a good steward of what he's been given, and he's not going to stop doing the wise things that he knows how to do. So let's see. Do we want to have a discussion about this, or do we want to talk about the people you hang out with? We'll do a democratic vote this time. How many of you want to talk about getting rich fast, and how many of you want to talk about who you surround yourself with? Get rich fast. Who you surround yourself with. Okay. Verse 13. Whoever despises the word brings destruction on himself, but he who reveres the commandment will be rewarded. The word revere is high esteem, prioritize, to put value in. So the one who despises God's word will bring destruction upon himself. Proverbs 13 has already laid out the reason why. Because when you're a person who's not grounded in what is true, your destruction is coming, whether it's on this side of eternity or the other side. But he who reveres the commandment will be rewarded. The one who's rooted to what is true. And it's not just what is true, it's who is the lawgiver. When you are a person who knows God's word and you know God as the one who's given his word, you are rooted in something that will be rewarded, it says. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Some versions, this is where we get our phrase, I don't suffer fools. This is where we get the phrase. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. So let's talk about a couple things. Let's talk about walking with the wise. How many of you have friends or someone in your life that when I say wise person, you have a visual on a person or two? How many of you know somebody wise? How many of you would say, in this room, you know somebody who is wise? Yeah. Okay, so we know these people. How many of you know people who are not wise? Okay, so we're on the same page. We're all humans. Okay, so I think this is as simple as it is. Your choice of companions matters. And I don't think this is, let's create a cultic environment where we only let wise people in who pass like some litmus test. This is, I think a good word is, who is your inner circle? When you're seeking real wisdom, and what is real wisdom? It's not just knowledge. We've talked about it. It's chokmah in Hebrew. What is it? It's knowledge that somebody knows how to put into the action that God intended. This is God's truth and knowledge in real action. So we have to know that there is things that require more wisdom than others. So, hey, what should we have for dinner tonight? Could I ask Greg and ask somebody off the street that I don't know and still feel like that's a decent question to ask both people? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe you're in a position where you're like, I'm thinking about a career change. How many of you want to pull 10 people off the street to figure out what you're going to do? No. Well, who are you going to pull into that conversation? People you trust. Now, I think this is, we've already talked about this. I think that we need to use discernment on what topics need wisdom more than others. I think sometimes we can become a little cavalier with things that might require more wisdom than we think, and we're drawing in voices and even experts that don't know the Lord. And I think that can be a pitfall. So who is your inner circle? It says, walking with the wise. This is, let me flip back over because I have the scripture on one page. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Who we associate with, it matters. What is their thought process when you ask somebody, hey, I'm having a conflict with my my spouse, I was wondering if you could hear me out here. Do you want to talk to the guy who's been divorced 3 times and living with a divorced woman? Yeah, probably not, right? But there might be a draw. We're all laughing. There might be a draw to vent, and we might go to the first person who's willing to listen. That's not pursuing wisdom. We know people who are really intelligent, really smart. Maybe they're coming from an angle of like, you should totally shift careers. Here's why. Financially, the market is going to get super hot in this field, and I know somebody who could get you into it. You should get into it right now. Is that a wise choice? It could be a wise choice to switch career, but that's not the wise rationale for doing it, right? I think there's a sense of calling on the work that you do that requires a depth of somebody who knows the Lord. And this is what Proverbs tells you. The more you walk with wise people, guess what? It actually is contagious and it begins to wear off on you. You don't want to suffer harm from fools. Your choice of a foolish companion, I read this week, just shows that you are foolish in choosing your companions. Kind of an interesting. I was watching a little video about Proverbs 13, and the guy said this. People are always asking me, why does fill in the blank bad thing always happen to me? And I asked them, have you evaluated, fill in the blank, who you spend your time with? Sparing the rod versus discipline, and then we're going to break into a discussion as we wrap up tonight. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. There's a cool footnote for the word discipline if you want to check it out. So sparing the rod actually equals hating your son is what it says. How many of you would say that word hate is a pretty strong word? I was talking at my table when we first read through is the idea of discipline in our world is kind of like a nasty word. It's like a 4-letter word to our culture. Because to discipline someone else, our world would say that's not compassionate. It's not very nice, right? Sparing the rod and you hate your son. What is it saying? Yeah, you're not doing what's best for them.
You don't love them, you don't care about them.
Yeah, because we know that discipline leads to wisdom. Like right from the start, the fear of the Lord and discipline to live in his truth is what brings out wisdom. So to spare discipline because it maybe is like hard to do. How many of you know like sometimes when you discipline a child, it hurts you doing the discipline? So maybe you're trying to spare yourself the nasty feeling. Maybe you're trying to spare your child crying or putting up even more of a fight because it's bedtime and let's just give in and be done with it. This does not equal discipline, and without discipline there is no wisdom. So it's not compassion, it's actually subjecting others to a lifestyle of laziness and destruction. I'll be totally honest, we're fighting this battle right now because I feel like we got behind the curve, and I am very much like, just put him in bed, I'll clean up his mess. Colton, because we don't think that Shepherd should clean up his messes yet. But you get to this and you realize, oh no, we better reverse course or we're going to create a monster that thinks mom and dad clean up after him in all things. And like that little monster is already pretty rabid and it's just been like a year, right? So it's not compassionate to spare discipline. It's actually subjecting others to laziness and destruction. Okay, so here's the prompt and the question. You can read it. I'll spare you reading it twice. Apologies for the spelling error. If you don't catch it, then there just isn't one. So why don't we do that for 6 or 7 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. I was just praying and thinking, jotting down some things in journal and in the margins of my Bible this week. And this is just one thing I want to encourage you with and leave you with as we wrap up the night, as we're talking about disciplines. How many of you would say you have a routine or a discipline in your life, a spiritual routine? Maybe it's like every day at this time I read my Bible. Maybe it's like every day is different, but every Tuesday this is what I do. Every Monday, that's what I do. I've been chatting with a handful of younger people lately, and really just kind of seeing something that's coming to light that I feel like, man, that's encouraging, and also some things that are a challenge. And how many of you are accomplishment-oriented people? You're achiever-oriented people. You like your checklist. You like to get stuff done. You're a get stuff done kind of person. I think that's awesome. And the world needs a lot of get stuff done people, or guess what? Stuff doesn't get done. But I want to warn and encourage, because I'm speaking to myself. If that's you, that's also me. Is so often this discipline, the spiritual discipline thing, we pursue it with a really genuine, pure heart that we want to know the Lord and we want to be known by Him in an intimate way every day. And slowly our personality starts to get so involved that this discipline becomes like this. And it's pray, read, fast, worship, yeah. And then the way that you evaluate your spiritual life is at the end of the day, you're like, let me check my report card. I did good today. And we're laughing because it's kind of funny, but you can all ready. Oh my gosh, this totally looks like fart. But if we're not careful, this could become our spiritual report card, and we can convince ourselves we got straight A's and a 4.0. God must be so happy with me. Instead of remembering, I think, what the deep wisdom of Proverbs is, and it's actually in the real discipline is, you know what I didn't get to reading this morning because God was really speaking to me deeply in prayer, and I'm not going to hold that against myself. And what happens is I think God begins to shape you to be a person who can hear His voice, who can discern tricky situations, who can have the self-awareness and self-control to, you know what, I'm going to hold my tongue even though I have something to say right now because it's not the right time. And instead of being someone who's trying to get everything done, we say, God, I just give myself to you and I want you to shape something in me. So if you're someone and you're feeling like, man, in this season, I'm just not getting to all of this stuff, I wouldn't say don't worry about it. I would say check in with God and say, does He want you to get to all this every single day, all the time like you always have? Or is there something new for you? Maybe He wants you to press deeper into what your prayer life looks like. Honestly, that's what I feel like God is telling me right now. I feel like if I just felt my personality path, I would just read all the time, and I would be like so content and so happy. And I feel like God is kind of pulling back on that a little bit and saying, hey, I want you to know me a little bit more than just my word. So that's my encouragement for you. Let me pray and then we'll dismiss. And God, thank you for your word. And thank you that as we talk about wisdom, we get to do it with an open mind. We get to do it with people who we think of as the wise ones in our midst. And thank you that every day there's somebody who has something to contribute to our study of your word. We want to know it, but we don't want to just know it as knowledge. We want it to be something that seeps deeply into who we are, that it would kind of leak out of us in surprising ways that shed light on dark things, that speak truth into people's lives, that speak encouragement into those that need it. And so, God, I pray that maybe the fruit of our time together would be that you give us opportunities to walk it out in real time, maybe even tomorrow at work or tomorrow at school. Would you, in a weird way, maybe you'd put us in an awkward situation where we get to hear your voice say, bite your tongue, or speak the truth. So God, we want to be your hands and feet. We recognize that so many of the things you call us to, that we're prone to do it partially right or partially wrong. And God, I pray that your grace would abound in those times, that you would remind us that when we fall into you, that we fall safely and soundly, that you are protecting us. So go before us, give us the courage and boldness to be your disciples. Amen. Amen. Awesome. Thanks for coming. Hopefully we'll see you next week.